In 2023, a guy with a master's degree in communications applied to a content writing job paying $42,000 a year. The rejection said he was overqualified. That same week, a 22-year-old with a YouTube channel and 4,000 subscribers got the job. A mechanical engineer graduated with $87,000 in debt, couldn't find a firm hiring, and took a sales role at a telecom company. A pre-med student finished 4 years of biology, didn't get into med school, and spent the next 2 years doing administrative work at an insurance company. And somewhere outside of Columbus, a kid who dropped out after 1 semester is running a Shopify store doing $380,000 a year in revenue. None of this is a fluke. None of this is luck. There is a pattern here, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So here is the question I want you to sit with for the next 20 minutes. What if the degree was never the asset you were told it was, and an entire generation just paid $200,000 to find out the hard way? We are going to explain exactly how this machine was built, why it worked for 40 years, why it stopped working, and what actually matters now that it has. Let me introduce the metaphor I want to use for this whole video because I think it is the cleanest way to explain what happened. Think of the education to employment pipeline as a conveyor belt. You step on at 18. The belt carries you forward. You go through high school, then you go to university, then you come out the other end at 22 or 23, and the economy is supposed to be waiting there with a job, a salary, and a path upward. That is how the machine was sold. Step on, get processed, get deposited into a functioning middle-class life. For a long time, the belt worked. Not perfectly, not for everyone, but well enough that it became the default answer. Parents believed it. Guidance counselors believed it. Banks were willing to lend against it. Society organized itself around it. But here's what nobody stops to ask. Who built the conveyor belt? What is it actually designed to do? And what happens when the destination it was pointed at no longer exists? Because that is where we are right now. And it is going to take a few layers to really understand why. The first thing you have to understand is that the conveyor belt did work. This is important. I am not here to tell you that college was always a scam. That is the lazy take, and it is wrong. The lazy take ignores what the data actually shows across different time periods. In the 1950s, 1960s, and into the 1980s, a university degree was genuinely rare. In the United States in 1960, roughly 8% of adults had a 4-year degree. 8%. That number matters because scarcity is what creates value. When 8% of the workforce has a credential and 100% of employers want organized, literate, trainable workers, the math is obvious. The degree signals something real. It signals that you survived a filtering process. It signals that you can follow instructions for 4 years, meet deadlines, and operate inside institutional structures. That was the signal, and employers paid a premium for it. The wage gap between degree holders and non-degree holders through the 70s and 80s was enormous. We're talking about something like 40 to 50% higher lifetime earnings on average. That is real money. That is a genuine return on investment. So when your parents or grandparents told you to go to college, they were not lying to you. They were giving you accurate advice for the world they experienced. The mistake is assuming that the world they experienced is the same world you are entering. It is not even close. Here is where the conveyor belt starts to get strange. At some point, the machine got popular, wildly popular. The government decided to make college more accessible, which sounds like a good thing, and in some ways was a good thing. But accessible means subsidized, and subsidized means the price signal breaks. When you can borrow essentially unlimited amounts of money to attend any institution, universities no longer need to compete on price or on outcome. They just need to compete on prestige and marketing, and they are very good at marketing. Between 1980 and 2024, the cost of a 4-year university education in the United States increased by roughly 1,300%, adjusted for inflation. Tuition grew 8 times faster than wages. 8 times. Not 8%, 8 times. Think about what that means on the conveyor belt. The machine got more expensive, way more expensive, but the belt kept moving at the same speed and depositing people in roughly the same place. A degree in business administration in 1985 cost you maybe $8,000 in total tuition. You came out making $30,000 a year, paid it off in a few years, and the math worked. A degree in business administration in 2024 costs somewhere between $60,000 and $120,000. Just in tuition, often more with room and board. You come out making $45,000 to start if you are lucky. And now the math does not work. Not even close. You stepped onto the same belt, you got processed the same way. But the price went up 400% and the output barely moved. The return on investment collapsed, not for every degree, not for everyone, but on average, across the broad middle of the credential economy, the math broke. And here is the really uncomfortable part. The institutions that run the belt have no incentive to tell you this. A university does not get paid based on your post-graduation salary. A university gets paid when you enroll. That is the only transaction that matters to them. After that, you are a statistic in a pamphlet. The Career Services Center is not a guarantee. It is a photo opportunity. I want to be precise here because I am not attacking professors or administrators as people. Most of them are doing their jobs. The problem is the incentive structure they operate inside. The incentive for a university is tuition revenue, research grants, donor relationships. In U.S. News rankings, none of those four things are directly tied to whether you get a good job in your field 5 years after graduating. So the machine kept getting more expensive, the outcome stayed roughly the same or got worse, and the people selling tickets to ride had every reason to keep selling and no reason to stop. That is not conspiracy. That is just how misaligned incentive structures work. You do not need anyone to be evil, you just need the incentives to be pointed in the wrong direction. Now here is where it gets genuinely dark. Even if the cost had stayed the same, there is a second problem that would have eventually broken the conveyor belt anyway. And this problem is called credential inflation. Credential inflation works like this. In 1970, you needed a high school diploma to get a decent office job. By 1990, you needed a bachelor's degree to get that same job. By 2015, some of those same jobs were starting to list a master's degree as preferred. The job did not change. The actual work, the day-to-day tasks, the required competencies, those stayed roughly the same or in many cases got simpler due to technology. But the credential requirement ratcheted up because more people had credentials and employers needed some way to filter. This is important because people misdiagnose this. They think the problem is that their degree is not good enough and they need more education. So they go get a master's degree, then the floor moves again, then they think maybe they need a different specialization, and the machine is very happy to sell them that next ticket. What is actually happening is a positional arms race where everyone is running to stay in the same place. It is like everyone in the stadium standing up to see better. When everyone stands, no one sees better. You just collectively made everyone's legs tired. By 2020, roughly 40% of Americans over 25 had a 4-year degree. Compare that to 8% in 1960. When 40% of the labor force has a credential, that credential can no longer function as a meaningful filter. It just becomes the baseline, the floor, the thing you need just to get considered. And when something becomes the floor, it stops being the advantage, it becomes the absence of a disadvantage. And you are still paying $200,000 for it. Let me give you a concrete picture of what this looks like in practice. Imagine two people, Marcus and Tyler, both 23 years old, same city, same general level of intelligence and work ethic. Marcus goes to a mid-tier state university, 4 years, studies marketing, walks out at 23 with $68,000 in student loan debt, gets his first job at a mid-size agency making $44,000 a year. After taxes, rent, car insurance, groceries, minimum loan payments, he has maybe $240 a month left over. He is not building anything. He is treading water while paying interest on a decision he made at 17. Tyler takes a different path, spends the same 4 years doing freelance graphic design, takes online courses that cost him a total of maybe $2,000, builds a portfolio, lands a few agency clients on his own, and by year 3 is making $55,000 a year with no debt. By year 4, he is at $68,000. He has been investing for 2 years. He has equity in his own skills in a way that is liquid and portable. At age 27, Marcus and Tyler are making roughly the same money. But Marcus still has $49,000 in debt, and Tyler has a growing investment account. The conveyor belt deposited them in the same place. Marcus just paid $68,000 for the ride, and Tyler walked. Now, I want to be fair here because the natural objection at this point is, What about the fields where you genuinely need the credential? And that is a real objection. Medicine, law, engineering, architecture. These are fields where the degree is not optional, where the credential is legally required, or where the technical training is actually deep and specific. I am not talking about those fields. Those are the narrow exceptions that people constantly use to defend the entire system, which is a bit like pointing at the one functioning escalator in a broken building and saying the building is fine. The vast majority of degree programs are not medicine, they are not law. They are communications and business and sociology and criminal justice and psychology and general management. And for those degrees, the empirical return on investment has been declining steadily for 2 decades. Actually, this is a good moment to pause on the psychology of this, because I think the psychology is at least as important as the economics. There is a cognitive bias called the sunk cost fallacy, and education systems exploit it perfectly without even trying. The way it works is, the more you invest in something, the harder it is psychologically to admit it was wrong. Not because the investment was good, but because your brain wants to protect its prior decisions. So you graduate with $60,000 in debt and a degree that is not opening doors, and instead of questioning the decision, you rationalize it. You say you just need more experience. You say you need to network better. You say you should probably go back and get a master's. Because the alternative, admitting that the system handed you a bad deal at 17, is psychologically unbearable. And that is exactly what the system relies on. Not maliciously, just structurally. The conveyor belt keeps running because people who wrote it cannot afford to admit that it failed them. If this channel is explaining things you have not seen clearly before, subscribe. I put out these kinds of breakdowns regularly, and there is more coming that you will not want to miss. Now let me take this to the third level, because this is where most people stop and they miss the most important part. The conventional take on this topic is college is getting too expensive, wages are not keeping up, student loans are predatory, the system is unfair to young people. All of that is true, but it is surface level. It still assumes the conveyor belt is the right machine for the job. It just thinks the machine needs to be cheaper or fairer or better regulated. Here is the deeper question. Was the conveyor belt ever actually designed to make you wealthy? And the answer, when you look at the incentive structure clearly, is no. The conveyor belt was designed to produce compliant, credentialed workers for large institutional employers. That was the deal. You step on, you get processed into a reliable employee, you go work for a company for 35 years, you get a pension. That was the social contract. The pension is gone. The 35-year career at one company is gone. The employer loyalty is gone. The stable institutional job track in most industries is either gone or rapidly disappearing. But the conveyor belt is still running, and it is still producing compliant workers who are optimized for a world that no longer exists. Think about what 4 years of institutional education actually trains you to do. It trains you to show up on time, follow a predetermined curriculum designed by someone else, perform on demand for external validation, optimize for grades rather than outcomes, defer to authority, and exist inside a structure that tells you what to do next. Those are excellent skills if you want to be an employee in a large bureaucratic organization. They are almost perfectly wrong if you want to build wealth independently, start a business, or operate in any economy that rewards initiative and self-direction. I want to be clear that I am not saying education is bad. I am saying that the specific form of education that the conveyor belt delivers is optimized for a version of the economy that is shrinking, and it is deeply misaligned with the version of the economy that is growing. The economy that is growing rewards demonstrated competence over declared credentials. It rewards portfolio over diploma. It rewards network you built over network you paid for. It rewards specific high-leverage skills over broad general knowledge. And Gen Z is the first generation that is being force-fed the old machine in large enough numbers, at high enough prices, into a job market that has moved far enough away from the original destination that the mismatch is now impossible to ignore. Millennials got a warning shot. 2008 hit right when they were graduating. The job market collapsed, they moved back in with parents, the debt became visible. But then the economy recovered, sort of, and the story went back to normal for a while. Gen Z is dealing with something structurally different. It is not a recession that will eventually end. It is a permanent restructuring of what work looks like, what credentials mean, and who gets to accumulate wealth. Let me do the mini case study here because I think numbers make this visceral in a way that abstraction does not. Let me walk you through a scenario I call the invisible tax. 22-year-old, let us call him Daniel, graduates in 2024 with a degree in communications from a decent state school. His total debt is $74,000 at an average interest rate of 6.5%. His starting salary at a marketing agency is $46,000 a year. After federal and state taxes, Daniel takes home around $33,000 annually, roughly $2,750 a month. His minimum loan payment on the standard 10-year plan is around $840 a month. His rent in any mid-sized city where marketing jobs exist is probably $1,200 to $1,500. Let us say $1,300. That is $2,140 gone before he buys a single meal or fills his gas tank. He has roughly $610 a month left for everything else. Groceries, transport, phone subscriptions, clothes, anything unexpected. There is nothing going to savings, nothing going to investments. He is not building any position, he is just consuming his paycheck and paying interest. Now here is the invisible tax part. The 6.5% interest on $74,000 is $4,810 in the first year. Daniel is paying roughly $4,800 just to hold the debt before he touches the principal. That is money going directly to the loan servicer for the privilege of having attended a university that already spent that money before Daniel ever showed up. Over a standard 10-year repayment, Daniel pays approximately $101,000 total to retire a $74,000 debt. He paid $27,000 in interest on top of what he borrowed. That $27,000, invested modestly at 7% annual return over 20 years, would have been worth roughly $104,000. Daniel does not just owe $74,000, he owes the opportunity cost of every dollar that debt captures for the next decade. And that is the median scenario, not the disaster scenario, the perfectly ordinary everything goes fine scenario. Now let me do the fourth turn because this is where I want to challenge the frame one more time. Here is the reversal I want you to sit with. You think the degree is the problem, but actually the degree is not the problem. The real problem is that most people have never been taught how to think about return on investment as it applies to their own time and capital. The degree is just the most expensive and most visible example of a much broader pattern of uninvested decision-making that runs through the entire financial life of most people. People buy degrees they cannot afford because they have never been asked to model out the actual returns. People take jobs that cap their upside because they've never been shown how leverage works. People save money in low-yield accounts because nobody explained compound interest to them viscerally enough at a young enough age. People stay in cities where the cost of living destroys their ability to build wealth because moving feels scary and the numbers feel abstract. None of these people are stupid. They are just operating on default settings inside a machine that was designed to keep them on the belt. The education system does not teach finance. This is not an accident. It is not a conspiracy either. It is just a reflection of what the people who built the system needed from the system. They needed workers who would show up. Understanding capital allocation was not on that list. So you have an entire generation, Gen Z, that is now entering adulthood, facing the most expensive credential market in history, the most disrupted job market in decades, and carrying less practical financial literacy than any previous generation. Because the machine they came through was never designed to produce financially literate people. It was designed to produce workers. And the jobs those workers were supposed to get are being automated, consolidated, offshored, or restructured into gig arrangements that carry none of the stability the original social contract promised. Here is a comedic cutaway for a second because I need it before this gets too grim. Imagine a vending machine that used to give you a sandwich for $1. That was the deal. You press B4, you get a sandwich. Reliable, fine. Over 30 years, the sandwich price slowly goes up, $1, then $3, then $11, then $42. But the vending machine people keep telling you it is an investment, the sandwich has never been more valuable, this sandwich will change your life. You need this sandwich to be taken seriously. And then you press B4, you pay $42, and you get a napkin. Not even a bad sandwich, a napkin. And the vending machine says, did you apply your napkin properly? Have you networked your napkin? Maybe you should get a second napkin. Have you considered a master's napkin? That is the conveyor belt in 2026. Now look, I want to talk about what actually works, because this is not supposed to be a 40-minute complaint session. The point of diagnosing the broken machine is to stop putting coins into it blindly and start understanding what machines actually pay out. The economy in 2026 rewards three things more than it rewards credentials. I am going to give you the three-level framework for understanding how value actually flows in the current environment. Level 1 is proof of work. Not credentials, not potential, not years of experience. Proof of work, the shift that has happened over the last 10 years, accelerated dramatically by the internet and remote work, is that the transaction cost of demonstrating competence dropped to nearly zero. A developer can put their code on GitHub, a designer can put their portfolio on a public page, a writer can publish, a marketer can show results from real campaigns. A salesperson can document outcomes. This means the gap between what you know and what an employer or client can verify has essentially closed, which means the credential as a verification mechanism is increasingly redundant. Why would a company pay for a degree as proof of skill when they can look at what you have actually built? Amazon removed the degree requirement for a majority of its corporate roles in 2021. IBM did something similar. Dozens of large companies are running internal programs to hire based on demonstrated skill and certifications rather than degrees. This is not employers being generous. This is employers optimizing their talent acquisition because the degree filter stopped reliably selecting for what they actually need. If you understand this, the practical implication is obvious. Build the proof before you build anything else. Build it publicly, build it specifically, make it impossible to ignore. A portfolio of 10 real projects in a marketable skill is worth more in the current market than a diploma in that field from a mid-tier school. Not philosophically, not in a feel-good way, measurably, in terms of hiring probability and salary negotiation leverage. Level 2 is specific leverage. Leverage is what separates people who earn money linearly from people who earn money non-linearly. A job, even a well-paying job, is linear. You trade hours for money. The ceiling is the number of hours in a day times your hourly rate. You can push that ceiling up by getting more credentials or more experience, but it is still a ceiling. Leverage is when your output is no longer capped by your time. Writing a piece of software once and selling it 1,000 times. Building a content asset that generates attention passively, creating a product that replicates your knowledge without requiring your presence for every transaction. The internet made leverage accessible to individuals in a way that had never been true before. This is actually a technological fact, not a motivational claim. The distribution infrastructure that used to require a corporation to build, a factory, a distribution network, a sales force, can now be approximated by one person with a laptop and an internet connection. Now, most people do not capitalize on this because leverage is not comfortable. It requires building things that do not pay off immediately. It requires tolerating periods where you are working and not getting paid in proportion to the work. The conveyor belt optimized people for immediate proportional reward. Do the homework, get the grade, work the hours, get the paycheck. Leverage breaks that loop. But this is where the Gen Z situation, as bleak as it is in some ways, is also quietly creating an opportunity. Because the people who cannot get onto the old conveyor belt due to cost or unavailability or changing job markets are being forced by necessity to figure out alternative machines. And some of them, not most, but some, are finding leverage earlier than any previous generation. The kid running the e-commerce store I mentioned in the intro is not an anomaly. He is a data point and a pattern. There are more people under 25 building independent income streams right now than at any point in history. Partly because the alternative looks so bad. That is not inspiration. That is just the economic logic of a system where the old path closed and people adapted. Level 3 is asymmetric positioning. This one is the least intuitive and probably the most valuable. Asymmetric positioning means putting yourself in situations where the downside is capped, but the upside is large and open-ended. It is a risk structure, not just a strategy. The conveyor belt, by design, is symmetric. You invest a specific amount of money and time, and you get back a predictable range of outcomes. The range is not great, as we have discussed, but it is predictable. Symmetric input, symmetric output. Asymmetric positioning works differently. It looks like spending 3 months building something with low cost but potentially high reach. It looks like learning a skill in 6 months that could multiply your income if it works, or cost you 6 months if it does not. It looks like geographic arbitrage, where you live in a low cost of living area while earning in a high wage market. capturing the spread. The reason most people do not pursue asymmetric positions is because they feel uncertain and the conveyor belt feels safe. But the conveyor belt is not safe anymore. A symmetric bet in a rigged game is not safe. It is just predictably bad. Here is the second comedic cutaway. There is a specific type of person that exists in every comment section whenever this kind of discussion happens. They write, "Well, I got my degree in accounting and I make $90,000 a year, so clearly you are wrong." And the response to that is, okay, that is real, but you are the exception that people use to protect a rule that is failing millions of others. You are the one person who hit B4 and got an actual sandwich. The machine is still broken. Also, $90,000 at 30 with a 401k that started at 26 because you spent 4 years in school and 2 years paying off loans is a specific financial trajectory. Run the math against someone who started investing at 21 with no debt. The spreadsheet does not care about credentials. Now let me bring this back to where we started. We started with a person who got a master's degree and got rejected from a $42,000 job. And I want to revisit that scene with everything we now understand. Why did that happen? It is not a cruel fluke, it is the output of a totally logical system. The employer had 200 applications, 140 of them had bachelor's degrees, 20 of them had some mix of a degree and demonstrated portfolio work, and one of them had a YouTube channel with measurable audience data that proved they knew how to create content that people actually watch. The master's degree communicated, "I spent 2 extra years and additional money in the credential machine." It did not communicate, "I can produce results in this specific job." The YouTube channel communicated proof of work. In a market flooded with credentials, proof of work is the scarce asset. The conveyor belt produced a worker. The internet produced a practitioner. Employers, at least the ones thinking clearly about talent, would rather hire the practitioner. This is not a story about one rejection letter. This is a story about what the credential actually signals in a world where everyone has one. And Gen Z is the first generation that is living through this transition at full scale, with full price tags, and with the weakest social safety net for the outcome. They were told the belt worked, they got on the belt at enormous cost, and they came out the other end into a labor market that has structurally moved away from where the belt deposits people. That is not a generation's failure. That is a machine misfiring. And the correct response to a machine misfiring is not to blame the output. It is to either fix the machine, route around it, or build a better one. Let me leave you with 3 things that I think are actually actionable from all of this. Because a video that just explains a problem without a response framework is incomplete. The first is, stop making credential decisions before doing return on investment math. Before you enroll in anything, whether it is a 4-year degree, a master's program, a certification, a boot camp, whatever, you need to run the actual math. What is the total cost, including debt, interest, and opportunity cost? What is the realistic salary range for the output credential in your geography? How long until you break even? What is the 10-year trajectory? This sounds basic. It is basic. But almost nobody does it because the institutions selling the credential are not going to do it for you. And the cultural pressure to just go to school is strong enough to override most analytical instincts. If the math does not work, the math does not work. Prestige is not a financial asset. Rankings do not appear on your bank statement. The second is, treat skill acquisition the way investors treat asset allocation. Not all skills are equal. Not all learning is equal. The question to optimize for is not what do I find interesting, but what skills currently have a large and growing gap between supply and demand. How quickly can I develop proof of work in this area, and how much leverage does this skill create over time? Right now, there are fields where the supply of skilled practitioners is far below what the market needs, and where the barriers to entry are primarily about time invested, not credentials required. That is an asymmetric opportunity. You can find these by looking at job boards, looking at salary data, and looking at where companies are struggling to hire not because the jobs pay badly, but because qualified candidates do not exist in sufficient numbers. Build toward those gaps deliberately, not because you are passionate about them necessarily, but because the economic system rewards solving expensive problems. Passion often follows competence anyway. You tend to enjoy things you are good at. The third is, start building a financial buffer earlier than feels necessary. The Gen Z trap is debt plus illiquidity. Debt from education, illiquidity from having no investable capital because every dollar goes to servicing that debt. The combination is paralyzing because it removes optionality. Optionality is the ability to make different choices than the ones you are currently locked into. When you have no financial buffer, you cannot afford to take risks. You cannot afford to leave a bad job. You cannot afford to take 3 months to build something. You are stuck on the belt by economic necessity even after you realize the belt is not going anywhere useful. The goal of the financial buffer is not to be rich. It is to buy time. Time is the resource that converts into leverage if you use it correctly. Even 3 months of living expenses and savings changes your decision-making profoundly. Even 6 months gives you enough runway to attempt a nonlinear bet. Start earlier than you think you need to. The compound interest on optionality is enormous. The conveyor belt was built for a different era. It is still running. It is still selling tickets. It is still telling 22-year-olds that the destination is right around the corner if they just stay on long enough. Some of those people will be fine. Fields that require deep institutional training still produce reliable outcomes. The machine still works in its narrow original use case. But for the broad majority, the people who are being sold a general education credential at a price that assumes scarcity while the credential has become abundant, the machine is no longer pointed at anything worth riding toward. The future belongs to people who build proof, acquire leverage, and position asymmetrically. Not because that is inspiring or because some YouTube channel told them to believe in themselves, but because those are the specific behaviors that the current economic system actually rewards. The system has always been a machine. The machine changed. Most people have not updated their operating instructions. If these breakdowns are useful to you, subscribe. 1 video a week, no filler, no hype. That is it.